Welcome to the Retro 21 Studios podcast. I'm your host, M Squared. Please support the podcast by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons on our various podcast channels, such as Podbean, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. To support our efforts, please visit the Retro 21 Studios website at www.retro21studios.com and click on support.
As research progresses forward, as society progresses forward, those types of tools need to be constantly reevaluated and updated for societal changes and changes to the situation. If we're looking at risk of recidivism, this is where bias comes in. Inherent in that data is wrongful convictions, excessive sentencing, those types of things, even issues like when you arrest somebody for marijuana use, our culture has changed about how we think about drugs and marijuana use, for example. If recidivism data from drug offenders includes marijuana offenders, all of that gets put into a system that we might not necessarily, we might not care these days that somebody smokes pot or even makes edibles and sells them, or the culture has changed. But that isn't evident in the data. So then that gets fed into a system, and we see risk assessments come from that information. And I think that's why AI needs to be, again, it can be an amazing tool. We just have to think hard about it. This is why interdisciplinary risk assessments, interdisciplinary work conceptually behind AI is really useful.
It has great possibilities, but people are being sentenced in light of the biases that you described, or let's just say some of the criteria that should be factored in to this exercise.
Right. Having worked with a number of different criminal justice agencies, mostly on the policing side, the hardest part for agencies is data, right? One of the hardest parts. And it's getting enough data and high quality data to inform estimates, predictions, whatever. Right now, I'm working in a space where I'm helping police departments think about how to do early interventions of officers so that they don't engage in misconduct later down the road. And it's extremely difficult work because you have to have enough good data to accurately identify risk. And there's a lot of different ways to go about it. Regarding Compass, I'm a hands-on person. I would say without seeing the data that's there, it looks like they've got a lot of good information. But without seeing how they assessed whether it has predictive validity and things like that, I would want to understand what that assessment looks like and how they go about doing it. On the flip side, risk is hard to assess, like I've said a number of times here, and the court systems are slammed. They see a lot of people. They need ways to efficiently deal with these topics. They need a quick and efficient way to assess risk. Compass might be the best that they have, given the constraints on the system. So there's both sides of the story, right? Like I don't necessarily want to say, yes, keep using a tool that shows obvious racial bias, but at the same time, it's what else are they going to do? So some judges might base all of their decisions on Compass. I hardly believe that, but some judges might completely ignore Compass.
Right. In an ideal world, when obviously we're always looking at the benefit to society, right? What's going to make the streets more safer, and also the individuals getting out, right? It's easy to talk about harsh punishments, but if those folks are getting out, you'd hope that there has been some level of reformation. What are your thoughts?
Sending people to prison, given that 70% of them come back, doesn't seem to be the most effective way to keep people out of prison in the future. And there's a lot of work on how to get people to desist, right, to stop engaging in crime. And there's a lot of things that do work and a lot of things that don't. And there's the issue of keeping communities safe, keeping people safe, and keeping the individuals who've left prison able to rejoin society and be successful at it. There's so much variability in there. Communities have different needs. Individuals previously incarcerated had different needs. And what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. I think my hope in all of this would be that we keep being willing to ask questions like what works and for who, not just what works, right? We've done a lot of what works, but we haven't done enough asking of what works and for who, right? Does a lot of my work in the incarceration and reentry space is around health and health issues. Does somebody with high mental health needs, when they exit prison, if they're not able to improve their mental health upon exit, their likelihood of recidivism is higher by a number of percentage points. But somebody that's able to make their mental health better when they exit, right? Maybe they have health care. Maybe they're just out of prison and they're in a better space. Maybe they're finally able to engage in the social supports they need to feel better about their mental health. Regardless of what it is, those people, their likelihood of recidivating is far lower. How do we serve people the best and get to a place where we can address everybody's needs? What works and for who? Why does it work? Criminologists, sociologists, social workers, psychologists, the folks that sit in this space and do this type of work need to continue to ask those questions and ask them repeatedly because society changes. So what works now might not work tomorrow. For example, people exit prison, they tend to go back to the same communities they were incarcerated in, especially if they're in big cities. And those neighborhoods, like in Chicago, it's somewhere between 70 and 80% of all people go back to those same top 5 community areas in Chicago. So you have an area where you have a lot of people that are parolees competing for the same job resources and are sitting in the same social space. How do we help those communities serve those individuals? How do we give those communities more resources that help those individuals rather than have it being a competition and that competition leads to more incarceration?
That's right.
So,
they just can't make a decision to go somewhere else. Hey, I'm not going to go back to that neighborhood I was in Chicago. I'm just going to pack up and move to
I'm going to go out. Exactly. Maui sounds nice, but I'm going to go back to the neighborhood where my mom lives and my mom has a couch or a bedroom or whatever, or my cousin's there. And they said that when I got out, I have a place to sleep. That's exactly what they're going to do. There's a lot of angles to think about. It's a whole system change, not a simple system change. And it's thoughtfulness about the data. What if in Chicago, Blacks and Hispanics get over-policed? Chicago's under something called a consent decree, which is a federal form of monitoring police departments that have been engaged in unconstitutional policing. You might be asking, why is she talking about policing? But police contact's the gateway into the court system. So if over-policing means people of color in Chicago are having more contact with the police, and that means they're more likely to end up in court. So how does that data then feed into a recidivism risk? Thoughtfulness about the data in that way, I think, is important. And as AI grows and we begin to use it, because we need efficient ways of understanding risk, which I completely understand, we just need to be real thinking about what feeds it.
What is your current work today? How does that relate to the technology as well?
So I'm working on issues of racial profiling right now in policing. I find racial profiling, let me say this, I find the measure of racial profiling fascinating. In criminology, we don't have any valid way of measuring racial profiling that is done in a quantitative way. We have plenty of stories, we have plenty of qualitative evidence, and we have some but limited evidence about racial profiling. And I'm going to say profiling is targeting people for police contact, and bias is, in my eyes, in my world, once you have police contact, you're treated in a more punitive way. Instead of a warning, you get a citation, right? Instead of a citation, you get an arrest, that types of things. So the police are deciding to be more punitive based on an individual's race. And there's implicit and explicit elements to this. But racial profiling's, particularly the idea of driving while black and brown, is extremely hard to measure. You need to know who is driving where and when by their race, which is hard to calculate in and of itself. Nobody's done it yet, though my team has, and I'm very excited about that. And then you need to understand traffic stops in places by the police and get that estimate. So right now I have a grant that I'm working on some really innovative ways of measuring racial profiling by working with civil engineers and transportation scholars to help me understand traffic flows. And criminologists haven't yet approached that issue from an fully intersectional space to help understand these issues on the road. So I'm hoping by the end of next year, I'll have an estimate of racial profiling that kind of focuses on all of that. And the other thing that I've been doing lately in the policing space is thinking about policing and disability. I started thinking about policing and autism, and how autism as a neurocognitive disease super complicates this transactional nature of a police encounter, where you get asked a question, you're expected to respond back and interact with a police officer, read a whole bunch of environmental and body posture cues and vocal cues. And autism, again, because it's an issue, it's a disorder related to social communication. It's a really common challenge. Reciprocal communication, verbal communication and nonverbal communication is difficult for individuals with autism. And there's autistic people are very different. Some can be fine with that. Some aren't, right? Some are nonverbal, some are highly verbal, but it ultimately complicates a police encounter. And how does that look, and how can the police interact with autistic people in a way to serve both their needs and the needs of the autistic individual? That work has led me into disability in general and thinking about how disability complicates policing, especially since there's the American Disabilities Act, which mandates that certain governmental services, like an arrest, accommodates disability. So it's an interesting moment, right, in the sense of we know issues of intellectual and developmental disabilities like autism, like ADHD, they're on the rise. I think the current number is 1 in 36 or 34 children in the US have autism, and that number has been increasing substantially over time. The police are conscious of this, like in the Phoenix metropolitan area, there's a number of police departments that recognize that autism is a challenge for them. How do we train officers? How do we interact with autistic individuals and their families in safe ways? So just doing that work. And I'm fascinated by disparities in policing, differences in policing, and I really want to do what I can to make policing more safe for the community, but also more safe for the officers, reduce police departments' legal liability when they come in contact with people that they don't necessarily know how to serve because there's no training, but also just shine a light on ways in which disparities in policing occur that we haven't been paying attention to yet.
Danielle, you mentioned the autism. I'm thinking some of what's manifesting with this condition runs counter to escalation protocols for police departments. Ask me very specific questions. I'm not responsive. I'm not quick enough in my responsive. And next thing, it's just going up and up the ladder.
Yeah, you're spot on. I think this is why I don't want to say autism is fascinating to me. Like, I don't want to make it be something that's like ivory tower down. But police are trained about suspiciousness, deception, non-resistance, passive resistance. And when you have those things, the opportunities for use of force increase. Autism, because it's a social communication disease where one of the primary challenges is that reciprocal social communication, lack of eye contact. When I talk about this work, I typically ask people in the room, so if somebody's lying to you, what's the first thing you notice? Oh, they don't make eye contact with me. That is literally one of the defining features of autism, is that they have difficulty maintaining eye contact or differential eye patterns or eye movement patterns. And if you look at, there's this amazing article by William King and Dunn that shows all of the different ways in which police officers are trained, what means deception. And it's like shifting eye movement, not making eye contact, fidgeting. And it's literally, I looked at that and I was like, this is a diagnostic code for autism.
Wow.
And the overlap is super intense. And it's just, oh man, this is going to create some problems if we don't get some training in there for police officers to like undo some of these assumptions in spaces when they encounter people with autism or other disabilities, even any neurocognitive disability here, or even there might even be cultures that don't want to maintain eye contact out of respect. For example, we need to be thoughtful about the various ways in which people interact socially and how that might be, police training might be a little overly prescriptive there. That might lead into problems for police departments.
Sounds like you enjoy your work.
I do. I love my work. I'm excited about it. I am really also excited about the racial profiling work because I feel like racial profiling is such a gateway issue into the criminal justice system. If we can figure out how to identify and reduce targeting mathematically, we can point to a location, we can point to a squad or something like that. We can maybe hunt down the institutional reason why that's happening. We can hunt down the rules within the department that might be creating creating profiling, where we can hunt down the stereotypic assumptions behind these and work to undo them. If we can lower that gateway contact, then there could be some dramatic trickle-down consequences. In my racial profiling work, we're using natural language modeling to identify traffic and pedestrian stops using what the officer writes down, right? So we're using this type of data science modeling behind the scenes to help us clean and code our data. But modern data science is radical in the sense that it can help a lot of things. And we should absolutely, in the social sciences, embrace it, but not lose our social science lens.
Danielle, I'd love for you to come back on and as you make progress on the traffic studies, that'd be fantastic.
We're doing, we've done homelessness identification and stuff like that in San Diego using some of the same work. Marginalized communities and policing is, I think, a mainstay of my work at the moment. So happy to come back.